Hey, you are listening to Real Talk with me, Ali, and her Avril on the Post Burnout Growth Podcast. And today's topic for you is boundaries, which, as always, we've just decided a few moments ago. We are delighted that you're here with us. So let's settle in. Hey, Avril.
Hey, Alison, it is good to be here, and hello to everyone who's listening. As Alison said, we pick our topics on the go, but we also let ourselves be led by the conversations we're having and by the work that we do, not just within ourselves, but also with the people that we work with. And boundaries is one of those that just cannot be ignored when it comes to the topic of burnout and it comes to the to all of the different conversations you might enjoy listening to as you work through our podcast. So on the topic of boundaries, Alison, tell me what your experience has been. We can either start broad and then start to maybe drill down into boundaries at work, perhaps. But I thought if you
Mm.
could kick us off with where did you even learn about boundaries and where did you even start?
I probably learned about boundaries after burnout in true transparency.
Sure.
Not something ever taught at school. Certainly didn't learn it from parents or family members. Even just the word boundaries. I don't think anybody around me growing up or even in my adult lives really ever spoke about boundaries. And it's really been part of my self development journey, which started back in 2003, that I kind of started to get a sense that there was this thing called boundaries, like where I begin and you end,
Hmm.
and even just the need for limits. Um, I think as children, if you've lived in a household where your parents, you know, were your guardians in the sense of providing you discipline or steer or guidance, like, eat your vegetables. You need to get your nutrients so you grow up, to be big and strong. It's
Yeah.
time for you to get to bed, or you need your Z's. Or perhaps it's something like, do your homework. You want to be able to get yourself a good job and da 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 and all the rest of it. And so the
Mm.
limits were imposed by parents, to say, there's some things here that you need to do to look after yourself, you could say.
Hmm.
Um, but as adults, we kind of arguably almost need to self parent because nobody's going to come along and tell us to do those things for ourselves that are in our best interests. So, boundaries for me is really something I started to understand through I had a coach back in 2003. It was my first coach. And it was
Hmm.
through that, and it was through some relationship challenges that I had at the time that boundaries even just came into my sphere of, understanding how to relate in the world, how to show up.
Yeah.
So when I think back, it's been quite scattered, a smattering of experiences that have gradually built up this sense of there being boundaries. But
Mm.
I think, like you said at the opening there, we don't take it seriously enough. We don't recognize just how important they are. I mean, they are
Mm.
literally, I would say, as important as the air we breathe. Not to put a fine
Mm.
point on it, but genuinely, I've come to recognize that is how important they are. What about you?
Everything you said, starting with, it's not something we're taught.
Mm,
And I'm going to go as far as to say that for some of us who growing up in certain cultures around the world, and if we are from certain ethnic backgrounds, boundaries are almost considered a form of disrespect. And so as a child, they're in the parent-child dynamic, but also with people who are in positions of authority, there is very much the top-down approach and the power differential. Um, it took me a long while, and I think what you said that resonates with me is I learned about boundaries way after I was fully burned out and had to work with a really solid trauma therapist before I could then again start to strengthen some more boundaries in coaching. through coaching. But I really had to reflect on my own social and cultural conditioning, because to make to make these shifts was almost in being it almost felt like I was in conflict within myself. Like, there's one thing about having boundaries at work, and for those of you who might be listening and may not have already figured it out because I haven't shared. So I'm South Asian. I'm originally from India. I migrated to the UK 15 years ago. So I am from one culture and have lived and worked in another culture. And so the thing about having boundaries at work in one culture and then continuing to show up as who I am within, as a member of my family or as a member of my community, almost felt like they were at odds with each other, because of these different dynamics around power differentials in terms of what it means to be respectful, towards, as we use the words, elders in our family. So I think for me, again, coming back to what you shared at the start of the conversation, not a skill that was taught, not a sense of this is this is literally where I end and this is where other people begin, or the world outside me begins. But also, just coming back to the basic foundational building block of the word no. The word no was just not in my vocabulary. I wouldn't say I was taught to have it or encouraged to have it or to be able to use it. To use the word no for me, and it took me almost,
Mm,
I had burnout. I was in my late 30s, almost pushing 40, to get to that point and then have to learn that it is perfectly okay to have that word in your vocabulary and then to use it in your outside voice
mm,
to say it
mm,
out loud, was a whole other piece of work. So um, that's, I think for me, that was the biggest piece of work and some of the shifts, and having appropriate people to work with as I kind of dismantled some of these old ideas. And again, none of this is doing the work of boundaries in terms of learning about what it means for yourself, but also for the world around you. It's not a one and done. There's no arrival point. Um, Often when people approach me now to do the work of boundaries within coaching in terms of, high performance work and all the rest of it, they're almost looking for that magic formula of like, can you tell me what to say? And sure, there are some scripts that you could probably deploy in the early stages. But I think the first and foremost thing is to kind of is getting comfortable with being very uncomfortable, when we are
mm.
looking at the work of boundaries. um, and yeah, I think you touched upon something else there in terms of the parenting and self-parenting dynamics. And I think from there, I just kind of wanted to jump off as well into, for some of us, the work of boundaries is also to address the people pleasing pattern, which can get installed at very early childhood developmental stages. And so
Mm,
what might have originated as parent pleasing, and again, this is,
mhm,
we're not bashing anybody, we're not
mhm,
blaming, or we're not going down that route. What we're looking at is in the context of where one might have had to develop certain survival patterns, adaptations around keeping our primary caregivers comfortable or safe so that we ourselves were safe. That can then become a very ingrained survival adaptation that continues long past its time and into
mm.
adulthood. And so that can look like people pleasing without, it's not just with others, but also with ourselves in terms of not having boundaries with ourselves too. So as you were speaking, those were the kind
Mm.
of things that kind of came to mind for me.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, no, sorry,
Go ahead,
I
Ali.
was just going to ask you, and also comment because I think you've mentioned some things that I just found myself going, yes, 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 nod, nod, nod. Was
Mhm.
firstly this idea of no and saying it out loud to others. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, that sounds like a micro part of it, but it's actually a massive part of it. And
Mm.
it's this thing about um, the fact of, I think we've talked about the good girl in us
Yes.
wants to say yes back to your pleaser type traits that you just touched upon as well beautifully. Is that if you say no, we've often, especially from early years, associated it to mean something about us. And that's something about us that we typically associate when we've said no to others or to a situation or to a request is it can almost create a sense of guilt, a sense of shame, possibly, and also a sense of who do I think I am saying no? I should be saying yes.
Mm.
And all of that can keep us in a bind that fundamentally what boundaries are about, at the real core,
Yeah.
is honoring our needs,
Yeah.
honoring our needs first. You've all heard the put
Mm.
the oxygen mask on yourself first. And it's an overused, example, but it just is
It works.
fundamentally, it's one of those almost universal truths that
Yeah.
you don't need to listen to us to know you need to take care of yourself first, in order
Mm.
to show up in this life. So the idea of even my needs are worthy and I can say yes to myself, which means saying no to
Mm.
that person or saying no to
Yeah.
that request because I'm saying yes to myself. So this no
Yeah.
and yes balance is so important, but not just the balance, the fact of saying it out loud. And I
Mm.
think that is massively overlooked, even just letting that word come out your mouth. I mean, you don't need to say a blunt no, which is also another misconception that we have, that we need to be either aggressive or we
Yeah.
need to be passive aggressive, or that
Mm.
we absolutely um, should just acquiesce to others' wills, that we should just buckle to others' requests because their requests and their needs and their wants and their agenda and their deadline and their priorities are
Yeah.
more important than ours. Now, there might be
Mm.
occasion in a workplace where, yeah, that's true, but it's not an automatic, yes, their stuff's more important. This is where a little bit of a pause instead of
Yeah.
reacting and discernment comes in. But it's just to say that always consider yourself first and honor your own needs. And in doing so, you're more likely
Mm.
to be able to meet the needs of others, from a place that's healthy,
Yeah.
and a place that benefits both of you. And I think that's the other thing about boundaries. It can feel like, oh, it's an either or situation.
Mm.
That, if you do this, I'm going to do that. And it has that almost combative, conflictive
Yeah.
misconceptions around it. But in actual fact, boundaries are for the good of everyone.
Yeah.
And it starts with that internal dialogue, as you were saying, about, I think this is a no, because I feel a boundary here is coming
Mm.
up for me, and actually I need to communicate this boundary. So from that
Yeah.
small, simple internal dialogue about no, and then thinking I have to say a no, and finding the words to say that no, be it no
Yeah.
itself or be it something else. It's
Yeah.
not to be sniffed at. We're absolutely not saying that, but
No.
it really, I just can't overemphasize boundaries, and it's not something that's a once and done. It's not something you learn a couple of boundaries and that's you're set up. It's
Yeah.
really about being in tune with yourself to understand your own boundaries so that you
Yeah.
can, in the moment, assess what might be needed for you, for a situation, and for others. So,
Yeah.
loads of things came up for me, as you said, about the no and about the pleaser. And I think about the pleaser piece is huge. I hear lots of people talk about that, and I haven't really thought of
Mm.
myself as a pleaser. Um, but because I specialize in self sabotage work, I've actually come
Mm.
to realize that the pleaser comes up for me in some really unobvious ways. Um, that I think I'm being accommodating. I think I'm being
Mm.
collaborative. In actual fact, I'm people pleasing. Um,
Mm.
or the people pleasing piece and boundaries comes up a lot whenever we've talked about being highly sensitive, um, and or you've had that tendency of people pleasing in earlier years that you carry into adulthood, that you become so switched on in an almost hyper vigilant format of constantly scanning others' needs,
Mm.
others' emotions, especially if you've been in volatile environments, either growing
Yes.
up or in adulthood, that you're ready
Yes.
on guard with that yes to shoot out your mouth before you've had a chance to think about it. And the amount of
Yeah.
times, like, I don't know about you, that I've said yes, I'm like, oh, why did I say yes to that?
Say that.
Because it's such an ingrained automatic response.
Yeah.
But that yes comes out so fast because we're in self-protect mode. So
Yeah.
yeah, I've rattled through a bunch of stuff, but what you shared just sparked off so many thoughts for me. So yeah, big topic as usual.
Big topic. And I love what you said there, but when I think I want to bring this back, especially for our listeners who might be working through, in addition to burnout, maybe aware of their own trauma stories, especially if you are living with complex trauma and or have encountered PTSD or any in the similar. Sometimes it's not even that the yes comes out. It's kind of being frozen on the spot because we have not been able to say no. Our body goes into freeze, and so nothing comes out, and we are in a more compliant state, and we just go along with what's happening and notice that there's a lot more anger and resentment. The other thing that came up for me when you talked about guilt and shame before as well, and I want to bring this back as well in terms of the workplace, that sometimes we feel we need to participate in everything, or we're going to and say yes to everything, or we're going to lose our place. In terms of being in line for promotion, or if I say no to that project, or I need to put some guardrails around my hours or the times that I work because I'm a parent, then I might not be considered for X, Y, or Z, or you know I will just be at the bottom of the queue, whatever the deal is. And these are again some of the themes and things I hear about from people I work with, but they were definitely my concerns. And so sometimes it's not even like having the yes doesn't come out, it's just that being in that frozen
Mm,
state, because that might have been where, we learned to sort of
mm,
not have boundaries. Um, but also from a shame perspective, which is what I was sort of referring to when we kind of come into the workplace, that sense of that fear of exclusion, that fear of loss of my place from my tribe, can really, and shame in itself can lead to some massive shutdown there.
mm,
Um, I also liked when you talked about, this is what sparked me when you said boundaries is combative, and sometimes people hear the word boundaries and think, I'm gonna go in for a fight. I've got to. So we're already gearing up for like, what are the thing we've rehearsed this worst case scenario conversation, and it's playing out like some Hollywood movie in our head, lights, camera, action, and we've imagined the worst possible thing, and then you go in to have that conversation with your manager, and your manager's like, "Yep, it's fine," etc. So I think this other piece is kind of when we are learning about ourselves. Use the word attunement, tuning to our needs, learning those edges around where we end and others begin, is that boundaries is not a form of confrontation. They are a tool, they are a way of being. But also boundaries are flexible. And so initially, maybe you have to communicate a lot more, especially if you're new to it. Um, but also boundaries flex as we kind of get better at things. We go when we learn discernment, that when we go into certain situation, we don't need to keep repeating that boundary. Maybe we just go, this is how I am, this is how I show up. And then the other thing I wanted to very quickly touch upon, when we talked about using the words no, but it's not just about, this is what I learned from my journey. It's not just about the language of no, not yet, not now, etc., but also the follow through. So the behavior that backs the
mm,
boundary. It's
mm,
one thing to say, no, I won't attend this meeting, or
mm,
I can attend, but I will be here until this point. Whatever's that thing that we are articulating is
mhm,
actually following through with the boundary. Because the thing
mm,
about boundaries is it is not a way for us to hold the world outside of us. It is a
mhm,
way for us to also hold accountability with self. And so part of,
mm,
for me, my own work within myself, and again now the work that I do with others, is how do we hold ourselves accountable? So if I've said, no, I can only do this meeting, or I need to leave at X, do I actually leave at X? Or am I
mm,
signaling through my behavior and my actions that actually I this boundary means nothing? So I
mm,
think that other thing, that the discomfort, I think, is in so many different layers of this process, which is A, really owning your needs, B, really having the language, C, actually following through, and then there's many more parts. I see you nodding vigorously.
mm.
So yeah, I think
Yeah,
this is a huge topic.
we definitely need to talk about this one more. I just want to pick up on your point because it's one again that I think that we don't tend to notice about boundaries is they go in two directions.
Yeah.
There's the outward boundary with others, with the situation, but there's also the internal boundary with us. And
Yeah.
that's the part where I see it falls down. And that kind of
Mm.
echoes or aligns with your comment around the behavior that backs it. Because
Mm.
often when we're trying boundaries out for the first time, or in the moment, because we're choosing to back ourselves, is communicating it and the response that we get to that boundary, which could be met with anger, could be met with irritation, could be, let's just say, met unfavorably and not respected. That too often that we don't repeat the boundary or hold the boundary at the level that we just expressed it, we then
Mm.
again we back down to others' will. And so that then provides a confusing interaction and confusing communication, not just for the other person, but for yourself, because then you wonder, well, why didn't they respect my boundary? Because just because you've communicated a boundary doesn't mean someone will respect it.
Great
Does
point.
it?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they will just get it there and then on the spot. They might need to hear it several times in slightly modified language, but to back it up with
Yeah.
the behavior, as you said, that behavior is also bi-directional. There's the internal kind of behavioral aspects of what do I need to do to uphold this boundary in my behavior, and what behaviors do I need to exhibit to this person
Yeah.
by way of being consistent. Because that's that the other point you touched upon is that lack of consistency in how we engage with boundaries can be the
Mm.
reason why the boundary didn't stick. And quite often I see people abandon trying to have boundaries, trying to communicate boundaries because they think, oh, it didn't work. But you
Yeah.
can't do it just one time
Yeah.
and hope that that's it. It may
Yeah.
take form of repetition. It's the internal process within you, the outside communication and behaviors, and the reinforcement that it's not a once and done. And just back to self compassion, I'll always keep banging the drum about and saying, okay, well,
Mm.
I tried to exert myself and assert myself, beg your pardon, and communicate
Mm.
that boundary. They didn't really react too well, and my people pleaser got the better of me, so I buckled and I
Yeah.
backtracked
Yeah.
and be like, okay, what could I have done differently? What did I need in that situation in order to uphold or maintain that boundary? And
Yeah.
next time I'm confronted with that person or that situation again, this is what I'm going to try next time. And
Yeah.
be compassionate that you're learning, you're finding, you're taking your baby steps. You know, when a baby first takes its first couple of steps, we're not criticizing it because it only took 3 steps. We're like, oh my God, you took steps, you took steps, it's amazing. Like, and everybody's
Yes.
cheering, right? So
Yeah.
if you can try to somewhat apply that sense or that lens to yourself and give yourself compassion, the boundaries
Yeah.
can seem quite daunting and overwhelming, but actually they're the one thing you probably want to embrace more than anything in this life that really allow you as an individual to flourish. I mean, that's my take anyway. What do you think?
I'm absolutely with you. When you said about self-compassion as well, I have this I'll just share it if it's if it's of use to anyone, but it amuses me on some days. I have in my phone a note app and I write little love notes to myself and it's my way of expressing self-compassion. And the starting words of the note are, so I start with my name. It says, Avril, I love that you dot dot dot. And so every day or every other day, but especially with boundaries, that's how it actually started for me. It was go, Avril, I love that you used all of your words today to say X. Avril, I love that you showed up and went into this conversation. I know it was difficult to you. And ever so often I will look back into that note and it's just these notes that I have written to myself from myself. um, I might not even remember what the situation was about, but there's enough in there for me to look at and to recognize the growth that has taken place, to celebrate the kind of the building of new behaviors and new habits around boundaries. Um, But also to your point around self-compassion, it's like almost me hearing the words that I probably didn't hear before as I was, as I'm doing something that's very, very uncomfortable for me. So yeah, that's that was the what I wanted to share. Is there
Lovely.
any one lesson or any gift that you gained from this experience of learning to set boundaries that you want to share with our listeners, Ali?
Um, I think the thing about boundaries, um, is that without them, life can feel like an uphill struggle, and it can create a whole bunch of internal conflict within yourself,
Mm-hmm.
including additional stress and resentment towards others that builds up over time. It can
Yeah.
eat away at your self-worth massively.
Mm.
And that's probably, I'm gonna, there's a bunch of things that I could mention here actually, but they're all interlinked and it's different for everyone. But certainly, two those top ones would be lack of boundaries. I'm trying to say how to say this without being too blunt around it. Is when we don't honor our own boundaries, we effectively abandon ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's what I have done for years. And that's always a bit of a challenging one to kind of go, ooh, I haven't respected myself. And it brings everything back to self leadership again, why I'm so passionate about self leadership. And there's so many facets to self leadership to really power us up, to really lead ourselves with that confidence, that clarity, that conviction. And like you said earlier, like really back ourselves and back ourselves up.
Mm.
Um, and I think that when we don't have boundaries, we're not showing ourselves the due care and attention. We're not honoring our needs. We're not respecting ourselves. And by doing so, we actually teach others
Yeah.
the same, even if
Yeah.
that's not the intended outcome.
Mm.
Unfortunately, it does often translate as such that when others recognize, it's like a castle without, the moat and the walls to guard it and guard its
Yeah.
perimeter. And it's like anybody can come and go as they want and please, right? And it's like, no, no, no,
Yeah.
we've got some bouncers here on the door, you know, and we're going to be checking whether or not you get to come in or not. Or actually, you can come in, but you can't come in today.
Yes.
And I think that having those, there's a word I'm trying to think of, sovereignty. That's the word I was looking for.
Yes.
Woohoo, it came up
Yes.
finally. My brain decided to select the right word for a change. Okay, so the sovereignty, we're sovereign beings and we deserve to control that, what comes in and what stays out in our lives. And kind of in a way, it's not like something has to stay out of our lives permanently. Like I said, it might just be yes, but not today because I've got other things and other priorities and other needs I need to take care of. But we
Yeah.
get to decide that. We get to love and honor ourselves and trust that we're making the right decisions for us in the moment. And if
Yeah.
others do not respect and honor that, then that's not for us to carry.
Mm.
As easy as that might sound for me to say that, I understand it's not an easy thing for most people,
Mm.
but it's this thing about without boundaries, the self-criticism, the inner chatter, the self-doubt, the self-worth, the self-esteem, the self-image, all of these get massively impacted by having little or no boundaries.
Yeah.
And so I just cannot stress enough that, I mean, if you were to work with a coach or somebody else and you did nothing but work on your boundaries, that would be an amazing gift to give yourself.
Yep. 100.
Yeah.
Um, I just want to sort of take off from where you've left off in terms of um when we don't have boundaries, like the thing that came up for me was you don't also allow yourself to be seen. Because when we are not in touch with our needs and we do not express them, and we do not express the emotions that are there, and I'm not talking about having a shouting verbal match, but it's like letting someone know this is the edge of anger or whatever. When we do not show up, because we cannot have the conversation around authenticity without knowing actually what are our needs here, being able to articulate them. But when we don't allow ourselves to be seen, we then put the onus, unfortunately, some of us blame others for not, for not having our needs met. So the thing around, these were the words that came to me, so I'll say them out loud, is
Mm.
when you don't have your boundaries, you miss out on the opportunity to get to know yourself, but you also kind of lose the opportunity to allow others to see you. So it really is a gift, developing your boundaries, reinforcing them, as Ali shared. And then the other piece around, sovereignty and um, for me, from a trauma aware and trauma informed perspective, the piece around voice, choice, and autonomy, as you're kind of coming through these journeys, if you are as well, other than burnout, if you are have an underlying history of trauma, then learning to use your voice, but feeling safe enough to do so. Finding appropriate therapists or coaches or mentors to partner with as you kind of develop and strengthen these boundaries, knowing that you have choice in all things. And we have talked about this in other conversations. We will link them in the show notes below around, using your discernment around, using your sense of control around things. Um, Overwhelm can make you feel like you've lost all control, but you still have that. So, voice,
Mm.
choice, and autonomy, you are a whole person. You are able to completely act and lead yourself from that place.
Mm.
So, when you're thinking about boundaries, just sort of bringing things to a close, our conversation, when you're thinking about boundaries, it's not a way to keep others out. It really is a way to be in healthy, strong, reciprocal relationships. So hopefully our conversation today has offered you a new way to look at boundaries. We will talk about this some more. We might have some guests on our show, upcoming shows. And we would love to hear from others as well about their own experience, especially when you're starting to put boundaries in place as a building block. When you are working through burnout. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you for listening in to our unfiltered, in the moment, post burnout growth podcast. Ali and I share personal stories of burnout, recovery, and growth to inspire and to comfort those of you who are on a similar path. Join us to find connection, insight, and renewed resilience. If you loved what you listened to today, we hope you will subscribe or follow us. And if you know anyone else who will benefit from listening to this conversation, we hope that you will definitely share this with them. So until next time, thank you for listening to us. It's goodbye from me, Avril, and from Ali.
Bye, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. I do hope you enjoyed today's show. See you next time.